Does Luther the Fallen Sun measure up to the series? Eh. Well, let me start off by saying I did not hate this movie. It was okay. It just felt like something was missing. I think part of it is that this movie tried to go too over the top, tried to go too big, tried to outdo the excellence of the previous seasons. And a lot of times when a series is really good, they try to just outdo that, outperform. And so in many cases, the stories get bigger and more outlandish and crazy and just extreme and wild, and quality can suffer as a result. Now, the series show Luther, when I found out that they were coming out with a movie and that it was going to be on some big screens, limited release on some big screens, I decided I wanted to go back and rewatch the series. Now, I had seen up to or through season 4. I never finished it. There were 5 seasons. The seasons are not very long. The first season has 6 episodes. The second and third seasons have 4 episodes. The 4th season has just 2 episodes, so it's like the length of this movie because each episode is about an hour long. And the 5th season has 4 episodes. So this picks up after the events of season 5. And let me tell you a little bit about Luther, if you haven't heard of it. It's a series that's based on a series of books written by Neil Cross. When I started watching the series, I listened to the first book. I did not care for the book as much as I liked and enjoyed the show. Part of the reason was because I felt like in the book, he pined away too much for his idiot of an ex-wife. He does still do that in the show, but it didn't feel like it was as extreme as the way it seemed in the book. And maybe because in the book, you're kind of more in his head as opposed to watching him on the screen. I don't know. It's hard to explain. Anyway, I blew through all 5 seasons of this show in, I think, less than 3 weeks. Definitely less than 4 weeks. I'm pretty sure I started it in February this month. And so I blew through this show. And you guys, this show is so solid. It is so good. I love Idris Elba in this role. He is perfect in this part. The cases that he tackles in each season. In the first season, they would sometimes have a case every episode. And then it started to evolve more to where certain cases were just they were like the whole season. And some very intense stuff happens in here, very psychologically intense. But also another thing is nobody's really safe. People die in here. Like people that you've come to know and appreciate and care for, they go. And it's not like a very dramatic and they die in his arms sort of thing. It's like they go and they're gone. They're just gone. There's no gasping and dying. You see them dying on screen. It happens and they're gone. And I really appreciate how this show handled things like that. And so you never really know completely what to expect with the storyline and what the characters are going to do. I like that a lot of times they would surprise you. I like that a lot of times you would forget about a certain character and then they would show up when you least expect it. There is a character that starts off in the show and has a presence throughout all of the seasons. This character and Luther have this interesting dynamic. It's a very strange sort of dynamic and relationship, and yet you can kind of get it as you're watching the show. I really liked, for the most part, how that was handled. Not super crazy with how things ended up at the end of season 5. It felt a bit anticlimactic, but whatever. In general, this show is solid stuff. If you like UK content, if you like detective shows, if you like shows that feature main characters that are flawed and yet they are still consistently trying to do the best that they can and juggle all these impossible situations and still try to make the right decision. I think you will like this movie. He's a very complex character. The supporting cast in here is very interesting. I really like the dynamic with everybody. And when I went back through and I was watching the seasons 1 through 5, I took notes. I thought about doing a whole review of the season of the show season by season, but I decided not to. I decided I would just sort of kind of just run through very quickly my thoughts about the as a whole, and then talk more specifically about this movie. Surprisingly, I don't really feel like I have a ton to say about this movie compared to the show. The show felt like it really got into the nitty-gritty of him and his struggles and how he was so often torn in all these different directions, and he constantly trying to clean up messes that he was getting into, not necessarily because of his own fault, but because he's trying to help people and help them out of terrible situations. And then he will do sometimes things that he should not do because he's trying to help somebody. I mean, it was so complex what was going on with him. And it reminded me of the show Dexter. And now Dexter's a completely different character. He was a serial killer. He was killing bad people, so you kind of rooted for him. But a lot of times he was trying to clean up messes that were created based on the stuff he was doing. And there's just like a ton of things to juggle. And with Luther, he was very often put in these awful situations, like between a rock and a hard place, and just you think to yourself, how is he going to get out of this situation? He is just so, like, everything is just coming on top of him, and so how in the world is he going to be able to fix things? And I just really appreciated the tension that would be, I mean, it made me frustrated because I'd be like, oh, come on, why can't he ever have a happy ending? Why can't things ever be okay for him? I want the best for him. I want him to have a happily ever after. And it just seemed like it was just never destined to be for him, and the did a really good job of pulling you along that journey with him and the frustrations that he would go through. I loved his portrayal in here, his physical mannerisms of the character. He has this sort of signature walk that he does, and it's like he's got this cool, like some kind of like a trench coaty sort of thing. Anyway, about this sort of signature walk or body language that he has, like a lot of times when he's walking and he's got his coat and he's got his hands stuffed down in his pockets, like with his fist balled, hands down in his pockets, kind of hunched over a little, he's walking. And I was like, why is he walking that way? Is it because he's cold, because it takes place in London and it's kind of looks cold there a lot of times? Or is it kind of a way for him to try to control himself, to sort of keep himself under control because maybe he feels like he's going to just lose it? That was just something that occurred to me as I was watching it. Even though I get frustrated on his behalf because things often don't go as I kind of wish they would for him, I appreciated that not everything in here is a happy ending. And there are cases he works on and he can't save the person in time. That's very realistic, and I appreciated that they kept it grounded in that realism. So with regard to realism in the movie, for me, it kind of lost touch with that feeling of realism. There were things that happened in here that's like, there's no way, how in the world, come on. And I didn't really have those feelings in the show because it felt like something that could plausibly happen. But there's stuff that goes on in this movie that I didn't feel that way. I was kind of like, I don't know about that. And also, it seemed like with regard to the baddie or the case that he's working on in this movie, it seemed like, now the author who wrote the books, he wrote this movie too. Now I don't know how much, I know he was involved in the work on the show itself, I don't know how involved he was in writing of each episode or the seasons or whatever, but if I remember correctly, his name did come up as written by Neil Cross, this movie written by Neil Cross. And it seemed like he was trying to outdo himself. He was trying to outdo these cases and turn it into something bigger and blockbustery than the show was. And okay, I get it. This came to the big screen. It is a movie. But because it tried to capture that feel, it didn't come across to me as intimate or as thought-provoking or as emotionally impactful as the show itself did. And so that's why I didn't really feel that same connection with him in the movie as I did in the show. And I wasn't expecting that to happen. I figured it was going to have that same feeling of realism that the show gave us, and it didn't. Some of the things that happen in here, and especially with the character, like the bad guy character played by Andy Serkis, it just felt so over the top and insane, and just like it just seemed like he kind of reminded me a bit of the twirling mustache bad guy sort of thing is what he came across as being, and it didn't feel realistic to me. Certainly the situations that Luther found himself in were psychologically horrifying, and you were thinking, how in the world is he going to get out of this mess? And that did draw me in, but it just didn't have the same feel. It just didn't have the same sense of urgency and horrifying level that the show gave us. And I'm not sure where things are going to go from here. I'm not sure if this thing is going to come back in any capacity, like as a TV, another season, or if they're just going to have maybe other movies or what. I really do not know. Idris Elba has exploded in popularity since this show started. It started, I think, in 2010, and the earlier seasons were closer together. By the time they got to season 4, that came out in 2015, but season 5 came out in 2019. So that was a 4-year span. And then this movie in 2023, another 4-year span. So I don't know if they're, I don't know what the plans are for him. I love him in this role, just like I love Benedict Cumberbatch in the role of Sherlock. And I would much prefer to see him continuing to play this role as opposed to, well, I can't really say as opposed to like his role in Suicide Squad, because I absolutely adored him in that. I thought he was such a cool character in there. He was so badass in there. But I just really have a good connection with his character here, and I would love to see it continue. And if they're going to proceed with the character of Luther in movies as opposed to trying to have seasons, my hope is that for the next one, if they do another one, that they'll kind of dial it back a bit, not make the baddie so outlandish and over the top as the way he came across in here, and sort of bring Luther back to his roots. Now, Luther's situation has changed completely, so I guess in some way I kind of get that he can't really go back to the way things were, but I wish they could strike that same tone going forward, if that makes any sense. There's only one other character from the show who ends up in this movie, and that's the older guy with the glasses. He was like Luther's boss. I had mistakenly thought that a character who showed up in season 2 and season 3 was going to be in here, but I hadn't seen the trailers. I just saw what I thought was her name, but it was the other girl. It was a totally different girl. And so that was a little disappointing, because I like to see recurring characters show up, but we at least got his boss, So there's that. But yeah, I just mixed feelings about this one, unfortunately. I don't want this to dissuade you from watching the show. If you guys haven't seen Luther, please check it out. It's so, so good. And I can't recommend it highly enough. Just rewatching it has just really deepened my appreciation for it. And I feel like I want to go back and watch it all over again. I want to watch it with Arturo. He's interested to watch it. So I'd like to watch it with him. I want to watch it over again. And I don't want my sort of mixed feelings about this movie hold you back from watching this movie. You may get a completely different feeling about it. And I'm glad to see him back. I'm not, I didn't rate this poorly. I gave it a 3.5 out of 5. Cocaine Bear was a more enjoyable experience, but it's kind of hard to attach enjoyable with this just because the subject matter. So it was a completely different sort of thing. I went from Cocaine Bear and then went right into Luther, and it was like this funny, crazy, laugh out loud experience with Cocaine Bear, and total flip side when it came to Luther, just because it's completely different feel and everything. Anyway, that's about all I can think to say. I decided not to get into specifics, so I have jumped over most of the notes that I wrote, because if I get into specifics with regard to what happened in here and you haven't seen the show, I'm giving you spoilers. And I don't want to do that. I want you guys to experience it for yourselves if you're interested. It is currently on Hulu, but this movie is coming to Netflix in March. So I highly suggest that if you want to see this movie, for you to watch the show first, because while this case is standalone, the character of Luther is not. And in order to really appreciate, and as much as you can appreciate him, even like I said, there was this feeling of disconnect that I had with him in this movie, just because of just the way it was. But in order to appreciate his character and the dynamic of his character with the people around him, you really have to watch the show to really get into his world and into his head and just the way he is as a person. And something that really bothered me about the things that happened to him was that it was annoying to me how quickly some of those who were closest to him were ready to believe that he'd done something so bad. Like when a situation made it seem like he'd done a certain thing, but he hadn't. How quickly people were to believe the worst of him. That really pissed me off on his behalf. I wanted to get in there and argue his case. Anyway, that's a tangent. But I went on with this much longer than I intended to. But yeah. Those are my thoughts on Luther the Fallen Son. If you guys get around to watching the show, let me know what you think. It's so good. It's so good. I really love it. Also the score is just great. And if you ever watch the movie, let me know how you think it compares to the show. I'm curious to find out if I'm the only one who has these sentiments, or if there's other people that kind of picked up on it. It's like I've mentioned before in other reviews, how you would just intuitively know when something works and when it's just not clicking. And this movie just didn't click for me in the way that the series itself did. I don't hate it, but it didn't work for me as well as the show did. I guess because it just felt like it was trying to get a little bit too blockbustery. Even though it wasn't something that's over the top action, it's not like an Indiana Jones sort of thing, but it just felt like it was trying to get a little bit too big. And that kind of detracted from it for me. So, okay, well, enough of my rambling. I need to wrap it up, and we'll see you guys later. Adios.